The Geo History YouTube channel made a video about the Arab-Israeli conflict, and I was really disappointed by it. Although the guy behind it doesn't identify it as a pro-Palestinian channel, he does repeat a lot of pro-Palestinian ways of thinking. Now, I will give him some credit. Almost everything he says is kind of true, but half-truths are sometimes worse than lies. Anyway, I thought this provided a good opportunity to respond in the form of a historical video covering the conflict from the beginning to the present day. I'm sure it will give you plenty to think about, so let's dive right in.
In France, Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish captain, is falsely accused of providing secret information to the Germans. The affair gains prominence as anti-Semitism rises in the country. In 1895, Dreyfus is publicly cashiered in Paris. Among the crowd is Theodor Herzl, an Austrian Jewish journalist.
Geo History starts this section on the birth of the Zionist movement with the story of Alfred Dreyfus and anti-Semitism in France. I would start with a definition of Zionism. Zionism is the national movement of the Jews, and one of its main goals was to create a homeland for the Jews. It is essential to mention that as the end of the 19th century saw a rise in national movement in general, as well as the fall of empires. In other words, the Jews were not the only people who wanted a land of their own. Herzl, the father of the Zionist movement, didn't come up with the idea of Zionism because of anti-Semitism in France. He had already come up with the idea as a student in Vienna. He grew up in Hungary, but when studying in Vienna, which back then was the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Herzl was met with a lot of anti-Semitism from fellow students, which is what led him to found Zionism. He said that if the students in the capital of a multicultural empire were this anti-Semitic, then anti-Semitism was not a thing of the past, of the church, of uneducated farmers, but rather anti-Semitism was also deeply rooted in the universities and the new ideologies. It might sound like a detail, but I think it is important, and the devil is in the details. It was not the anti-Semitism in France that led Herzl to found Zionism. It was the realization that anti-Semitism was not a thing of the past, but that it was here to stay. And so the Jews needed a solution in a form of a state, the same as many other nations.
The following year, the latter publishes a book in which he unites Jews worldwide into a single people who are not assimilable and who, to escape persecution, must establish their own state in Palestine or Argentina.
In Palestine or Argentina. Herzl did indeed consider Argentina, but that was only for a short period of time and only to solve the acute problem of the pogroms in Russia. Millions of Jews were running away from deadly anti-Semitism in Russia, and Herzl thought, what can we do to solve this problem? I mention this because it is crucial to understand that Herzl is the father of modern Zionism, of the idea that Jews needed to have a state, but Jews always saw the land of Israel as their homeland, and there has always been aliyot, which means going up to the land of Israel. In 1882, Jews from Yemen went up to Israel. Followers of Rabbi Hagaon from Vilna did the same in 1808. And before that, there were the followers of the Baal Shem Tov. Jews from all over the world kept coming to Israel despite the hardships. Herzl only added the structure of a state as the idea of nation-state started to develop in Europe.
Although in the minority, the 80,000 Jews living in Palestine organized themselves. They create a union for Jewish workers, set up the Haganah, an armed self-defense group.
So the Jews just organized a self-defense group, like out of the blue? Here Geo History is starting to ignore the actions of the Arabs of Palestine, and he continues to do that until the end of the video. Why did the Jews create the Haganah, which means defense in Hebrew? Because in 1920 there were violent riots against the Jews. In 1920 and in 1921, Arabs attacked Jews. Dozens of Jews were murdered. Jewish women were raped, and the Arabs burned and stole Jewish property. In English, it is named the Jaffa riots and the Nebi Musa riots. In 1929, there was another round of pogroms, the deadliest pogroms against Jews yet, with 133 being murdered, most of them in Hebron and Jerusalem. I mention the locations because those communities of Jews had lived in the land of Israel for hundreds of years. Most of them were not European Zionists. So many years before the occupation and before the settlements and even before the state of Israel, the Arabs were murdering Jews in the most brutal ways imaginable. I don't recommend doing that, but if you don't believe me, Google the 1929 Hebron massacre and see photos for yourselves. Geo History tells us that Jews migrate to the land of Israel, which is true, and we can all agree on that. What he fails to mention is that there were waves of Arabs that migrate to the land of Israel. The British limited the number of Jews who were allowed to enter, but the number of Arabs was not limited. The numbers are disputed, but are in the hundreds of thousands. About half of the people in Gaza today originally came from Egypt at some point around the end of the 19th century and during the time of the British Mandate. The last names of many of the Palestinians in Gaza indicate that they came from Egypt.
نص فلسطين يا اخواننا مصري ونص سعودي. ايش من هم الفلسطينيون؟ في عندنا في اسماء كثيره اسمها المصري وجذورهم مصريه.
And it is not only in Gaza. In 1949, Churchill said, those 500,000 Arabs came during the period of the 25 years of British administration and were an addition to the Arab population, getting employed under the condition we created. Why did so many Arabs migrate to the area of the British Mandate? Well, you know the answer. For the same reasons you see massive Arab immigration to Europe today. The British and the Jews had developed the land. There was more prosperity. The Jews dried the swamps and successfully beat malaria. Many Arab immigrants came in search for work and a better life. Geo History, like so many others, fails to mention the massive influx of Arabs.
Fearing an invasion of Palestine, the Haganah creates the Palmach, an elite unit trained for war. Finally, the Germans are repelled from Egypt. Around 1943, information about the genocide of Jews by Nazi Germany begins to circulate. David Ben-Gurion, the president of the Jewish Agency, prepares a plan to allow the immigration of 1 million Jews to Palestine.
So during World War II, the Jews formed the Palmach, and Ben-Gurion prepared a plan for Jewish immigration. That much is true. But what did the Arab leadership do during World War II? Geo History tells us nothing about that. So let me fill in the blanks. The leaders of the Arabs in Palestine, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, spent the war years in Nazi Germany, planning with Hitler and other high-ranking Nazis the extermination of the Jews in the land of Israel and in the Arab countries. He helped recruit Muslims to the SS. He broadcast Nazi propaganda in Arabic for the Arab world. He was one of the powers behind the Farhud, the pogroms of Arabs against the Jews of Iraq. Geo History talks about Golda Meir's trip lasting a few days to do fundraising for buying weapons in the US, but says nothing about the years-long connection of the leaders of the Arabs in Palestine to the Nazis.
Faced with British intransigence, the Palmach, the Irgun, and the Lehigh, a new armed terrorist group dreaming of establishing a Jewish state between the Nile and the Euphrates, organizes a campaign of sabotage and bombings against the British. On July 22, 1946, in Jerusalem, the Irgun commits a very deadly attack against the British administration.
So we are 14 minutes into the video, and for the first time the word terrorist is mentioned. And who are the terrorists? The Lehi. So the Arabs killing Jews in 1920, 1921, 1929, 1936 to 39, they were not terrorists. But the small Jewish group that targeted mostly British forces, they were terrorists. And of course, the attack against the King David Hotel is mentioned. Geo History has a pattern. When he mentions Arab attacks against Jews, a name is never given to the attack. It is mentioned in general terms. But when the Jews are the attackers, then they are terrorists, and he goes into more details. 2 notes about the King David Hotel bombing. First, at the time, it was the headquarters of the British Army, so it was a military target. And second, the Irgun, or the Etzel as we say in Hebrew, warned the British that they were about to blow up the building. But the British commander said that he wouldn't take orders from Jews. Do you think that the Arabs ever warned the Jews before they attacked? Geo History somehow also forgets to say that 260 Brits were killed by Arabs during the Arab Revolt from 1936 to 1939. Now let's see what Geo History has to say about the partition plan.
But on the other side, the entire Arab world opposes this plan and the creation of a Jewish state. In major cities, violence quickly escalates between Jews and Arabs and turns into a civil war.
Violence quickly escalated. No, no, no. If you speak to someone about the 1947-48 war, make sure that they get it right. The UN proposed partition. Neither the Jews nor the Arabs liked it. The Jews were promised the whole mandate, and the British gave 75% of it away to create Jordan. However, the Jews were still willing to compromise, while the Arabs said no to the two-state solution and started a war by attacking the Jews. You don't say violence escalated in 1939 between Germany and Poland and a war started, right? There is no dispute about it. The Arabs rejected the partition plan and started a war, and the first thing they did was to start killing Jewish civilians. I will carry on repeating this in every video if I need to, since it is basic fact, like it or not.
For Ben-Gurion, there is urgency, and he initiates a military plan aimed at establishing territorial continuity. The idea is that no Arab village behind the line should be an internal threat or a support point for future Arab armies. Therefore, they must be destroyed, or their populations expelled, or strictly controlled. There is still debate today as to whether this plan is solely military, or whether it has a purpose of ethnic cleansing.
Of course, Plan Dalet. So Geo History doesn't care to mention all the explicit calls coming from Arab leaders to eliminate the Jews. Here are some that I mentioned before. By the way, not once has a Jewish leader stood in front of a Jewish audience and asked them to murder every Arab they find. The closest thing pro-Palestinians have is Plan Dalet, which was a military plan to make sure that the roads that Arab villages kept attacking would stop coming under threat. This is the kind of thing you do when fighting a war. If the other side is trying to wipe you out, you make sure they don't. You do what you can to avoid it. That is the dynamic of war.
The Irgun and Lehi then commit a massacre at Deir Yassin, which provokes terror among the Arab population, pushing many to flee.
And Deir Yassin, of course. I've made a video about this before, so check it out. There is a pattern that you will find in all pro-Palestinian videos. They don't have much to go on, so they repeat the same points over and over. Irgun, Lehi, King David Hotel, Plan Dalet, Deir Yassin.
As the country continues to import arms, notably heavy weaponry from Czechoslovakia, with Moscow's support.
I don't know why, but this is the third time that Geo History has said that the Jews were importing weapons. I know that many like the image of the weak Jew. I kind of like the image of the strong, smart Jew who plans ahead and prepares to fight if necessary. Getting hold of weapons is a wise move if you are surrounded by enemies.
At the end of the ceasefire, over just 10 days, the IDF captures major cities between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, expelling the Arab populations eastward.
And as expected, expelling. Did the Jews expel some Arabs? Yes, I've said it before and I will say it again. In the creation of nation-states in Eastern Europe, in the Balkans, in Asia, tens of millions of people were expelled. The Arabs of Palestine started a war to eliminate the Jews, and they lost, and some ran away, and some were expelled. But here is an interesting fact Geo History forgot to mention. How many Arabs were not expelled and stayed on in Israel? 160,000. And how many Jews were not expelled from the Arab territories? 0. Not a single Jew was left alive in the Arab territories that were conquered by Egypt and Jordan. Again, it is misleading to leave out a fact like this.
Approximately 700,000 Arabs were displaced or fled the war and are now refugees in camps in Gaza. The country opens up to Jewish immigration, notably from Yemen and Iraq, where ancient Jewish communities are targeted. Within just 3 years, Israel's population doubles to about 1.4 million people.
In all Arab countries, Jews were suffering pogroms, persecution, and discrimination. Unlike the Arabs of Palestine, who started a war and lost, the Jews in Muslim countries never harmed their Muslim neighbors, but still had to endure Muslim violence. When they immigrated to Israel, they had to leave all their property behind, just like the Jews who escaped from Nazi Germany.
Israel must return the Sinai to Egypt, but gains a significant alliance with France, which provides weapons.
So the bad Israelis buy weapons from France. Not a word about the huge Egyptian-Czechoslovak arms deal that was signed a year earlier. This was a major turning point in the Arab-Israeli conflict, as the Soviets started to sell weapons to the Arabs, a connection that continues to this day. This is really pathetic. Every time the Jews buy weapons, Geo History mentions it. But when the Arabs buy weapons, nothing.
In 1964, the Arab League unites the main Palestinian groups to form the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO. It begins an armed struggle against Israel via terrorist attacks.
This is where Geo History finally gets something right. I will emphasize that the Palestine Liberation Organization was established in 1964, so before the Six-Day War, and before the occupation, and before the settlements. When they say liberation, they mean the destruction of Israel. It says as much on their emblem.
Yasser Arafat, the new strongman of the PLO, takes refuge in Jordan, where he intensifies attacks against Israel. He gains power and even attempts to overthrow the Jordanian king, but without success. The latter then attacks the Palestinians in the country. Yasser Arafat then flees to Lebanon, where he continues the armed struggle against Israel, including terrorist attacks worldwide. In 1972, during the Munich Olympics, a Palestinian commando team takes the Israeli delegation hostage and kills 11 athletes.
Two interesting things to mention. The first one is that Yasser Arafat, the native Palestinian leader who was born in Egypt, and his Palestinians tried to take down Jordan, and then they tried to do the same in Lebanon. You have probably heard that Lebanon is now in crisis. I think it is interesting that no one talks about the fact that the crisis in Lebanon, which was the Arab Pearl of the Middle East, was caused by the Palestinians and by Hezbollah. Israel and Lebanon have almost no territorial disputes. There could be peace between these two countries. But because of this Arab-Muslim hate towards Israel, initiated by Arafat and the Palestinians and by Hezbollah, Lebanon is going downhill fast. And hooray! After 23 minutes, Geo History mentions a specific terror attack against Israel, the massacre of the Israelis at the Olympics.
On October 6, 1973, Egypt and Syria launch a surprise attack against Israel with the goal of recovering the Sinai and the Golan Heights. Initially, Israel is at a disadvantage, but within a week manages to gain the upper hand, notably with the support of the United States, which sends weapons via an airlift.
The Egyptians and the Syrians never said that they wanted their territories back. They said that they want to eliminate Israel. And again, Geo History please tell me what is behind your obsession with weapons to Israel. Why aren't you saying a word about all the Soviet weapons that the USSR was pouring into the Arab countries?
With the southern border secured, Israel now focuses on Lebanon, where political instability benefited the PLO, which continues its attacks against Israel.
This is one of the meanest sentences that Geo History says in the whole video, as if Israel were the one that wanted to fight. Let's unpack some of the terror attacks that the Palestinians initiated from southern Lebanon. The Ma'alot massacre, in which Palestinians massacred 30 Israeli children aged 14 to 16, or the Avivim school bus bombing, in which 9 children of elementary school age were murdered, or the Coastal Road massacre, in which Palestinians murdered 35 Israelis, 9 of whom were children, or the Savoy Hotel attack, to name but a few. And in addition to that, the Palestinians hijacked airplanes and shot hundreds of rockets from Lebanon to Israel.
Yasser Arafat softens his policy. In Algiers, he proclaims the State of Palestine, recognizes Israel, and renounces all forms of terrorism against it. Within a year, 87 countries recognize Palestine. Initial meetings then take place and culminate in 1993 with the signing of an historic first agreement between Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli Prime Minister.
So the Israelis were always willing to compromise. The Declaration of Independence says that we, the Israelis, want peace. This is not mentioned in Geo History's video. However, he does mention the one time that Yasser Arafat recognized Israel. And then he somehow fails to mention that Arafat said that the Oslo Accords were like the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which was a temporary peace treaty that the Prophet Muhammad signed with the people of Mecca, meaning that Arafat saw the Oslo Agreement as a temporary agreement until the Palestinians were strong enough to conquer Israel. I guess you see the pattern by now in Geo History's kind of selective memory, or maybe I should call it selective presentation of facts. This is what I meant at the beginning when I said that half-truths are sometimes worse than lies.
Today, more than ever, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict seems to be without resolution.
I can agree with that. However, Geo History goes on to say that the issues are Jerusalem and the refugees and the settlements, and all that I strongly disagree with. And here is why. If the reality was, until 1948, it had all been peaceful, then I would say you were right. But as already stated in this video, the Arabs attacked the Jews, also the non-European Zionist Jews, in the 1920s and 30s. If the reality was that until the Six-Day War, it had all been peaceful, but after the settlements in the West Bank, the Palestinians started to be violent, I would agree. But they were already using violence before the settlements. The conflict is without resolution not because of refugees or occupation. It remains a problem because of one thing only. The Arabs are not willing to accept Jewish sovereignty in any form. It was true in the 1920s, and it was true in the 1940s, and it remains true today. Over the last few months, I have made videos about lots of the things I've talked about today. One of the videos I'm working on is about the Nazi-Arab connection, a topic I haven't talked about much and which deserves a video of its own. If you think it is important, then please support my work. I want to thank all my supporters. You keep me going. Please share this video with people who need to see it. See you next week. Yalla bye.